The sledgehammer crashed into the concrete, sending chunks flying across Marcus's backyard as his neighbor Karen screamed from a fence line. But when the police arrived with handcuffs ready, they weren't there for the reasons anyone expected. What started as a simple pool removal had just uncovered a secret that would destroy lives, ruin reputations, and prove that sometimes the most dangerous criminals are hiding behind perfectly manicured lawns and HOA committees. Marcus Rivera wiped the sweat from his forehead as he surveyed the massive hole in his backyard where his above-ground pool had stood for 8 years. The August heat was merciless, even at 7 in the morning, but he'd wanted to get in early. Start on the demolition before his neighbors began their daily routines. The pool had been a mistake from day one. What seemed like a good idea when his kids were younger had become nothing more than an expensive green algae farm after they'd lost interest and moved on to video games and smartphones. The maintenance costs, the constant cleaning, the HOA complaints. About the unsightly structure, it was time for it to go. He'd hired a contractor initially, but when they'd quoted him $4,000 just for removal, Marcus decided to tackle it himself. How hard could it be? Drain it, dismantle it, haul it away. He was handy enough with tools, and his construction background from his 20s would serve him well. The draining had taken 2 days. The dismantling of the frame and liner had taken another. Now came the hardest part, breaking up the concrete pad underneath that he'd poured when they'd first installed the pool. The contractor had warned him about this expense, but Marcus figured a rented jackhammer and some elbow grease could handle it. He was 3 hours into the concrete demolition when Karen Whitmore's shrill voice cut through the morning air like a rusty blade. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Marcus paused, the jackhammer still vibrating in his hands, and looked up to see his neighbor standing at their shared fence line. Karen was in her 50s, with perfectly styled blonde hair that never seemed to move despite the wind, and the kind of perpetually pinched expression that suggested she spent most of her time finding fault with the world around her. "Morning, Karen," Marcus called back, trying to keep his voice level. "Just removing the old pool pad." "At 7 in the morning? On a Saturday?" Karen's voice climbed several octaves. "Some of us are trying to sleep." Marcus glanced at his watch. It was actually 10:15 a.m., but he didn't bother correcting her. Karen had been complaining about something or other since the day he'd moved in 12 years ago. The pool was too close to the property line. His grass was half an inch too tall. His garbage cans were visible from the street for 30 minutes longer than the HOA allowed. "I'll be done soon," he said, revving up the jackhammer again. "You will not." Karen shrieked, her face turning an alarming shade of red. "I'm calling the HOA. I'm calling the city. This is harassment." Marcus couldn't help but laugh, which only seemed to infuriate Karen further. "It's my property, Karen. I can remove my own pool." "Not without permits you can't. Not without notification. Not without." The jackhammer roared to life, drowning out her protests. Marcus had learned long ago that engaging with Karen only made things worse. Better to just finish the job and deal with whatever ridiculous complaints she filed later. But as he worked, chipping away at the stubborn concrete, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was different about Karen's reaction today. Usually, her complaints were more calculated, delivered with the cold precision of someone who'd memorized the HOA handbook. This felt more desperate. 20 minutes later, as Marcus paused to clear debris, he noticed Karen was still there, pacing along the fence line while barking into her phone. "Yes, I need someone here immediately," she was saying. "My neighbor is destroying property without permits, and I have reason to believe he's violating multiple city ordinances." Marcus shook his head and bent back to his work. The concrete was proving more stubborn than expected, probably because he'd used a better grade when he'd poured it years ago. Each strike of the jackhammer sent vibrations through the ground, and he could feel the solid chunks beginning to crack and separate. He was making good progress on the eastern edge when the jackhammer caught something that wasn't concrete. The tool bucked in his hands, nearly throwing him off balance, and he killed the motor to investigate. At first, he thought he'd hit a root or maybe an old utility line he'd forgotten about. But as he cleared away the concrete debris, he realized it was something else entirely. Something that didn't belong there. "What the hell?" he muttered, getting down on his knees for a better look. It was fabric. Old, stained, but definitely fabric. And underneath it, something that made his stomach lurch. Marcus sat back on his heels, his mind racing. He'd poured this concrete pad himself 8 years ago. He remembered every detail of the process: the excavation, the gravel base, the forms, the pour. The ground had been clear then. Empty. So what was this? How's that demolition going? Karen's voice was suddenly much closer, and Marcus looked up to see her standing at the gate between their properties, a gate that was supposed to remain locked. "Karen, what are you doing in my yard?" She ignored the question, her eyes fixed on the hole he'd been digging. "Find something interesting." The tone of her voice made Marcus's skin crawl. There was something in it he'd never heard before, something that sounded almost like anticipation. Or fear. "Just old roots," he lied, subtly moving to block her view of the excavation. Karen stepped closer, and Marcus noticed her hands were shaking. "You know, Marcus, sometimes it's better to just leave things buried. Some projects aren't worth the trouble." "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means maybe you should consider just covering that back up. Putting in a nice garden bed instead. Something peaceful." Marcus stood slowly, his mind working overtime. Karen had never shown the slightest interest in landscaping advice before. If anything, she usually complained that his yard wasn't manicured enough. "Why would I do that?" Karen's laugh was forced, brittle. "Because sometimes the past should stay in the past. Because sometimes digging too deep brings up things that are better left alone." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Marcus looked from Karen's pale face to the hole in the ground, then back again. "Karen," he said carefully, "what exactly are you trying to tell me?" Before she could answer, sound of sirens cut through the morning air. 2 police cruisers turned onto their quiet suburban street, moving fast. Karen's face went white. I called them about the noise ordinance violation." But something in her expression told Marcus that wasn't the whole truth. And as the police cars pulled up to his house, as officers began climbing out with their hands already moving toward their belts, Marcus realized that whatever he'd found buried under his pool might be the least of his problems. The first officer, a tall woman with graying hair and sharp eyes, approached the fence line. Someone called about illegal construction activity. "That's right," Karen said quickly, but her voice cracked on the words. "He's been making noise all morning, and I don't think he has permits." The officer looked from Karen to Marcus, then to the demolition site. Her gaze lingered on the hole Marcus had been working on, and something shifted in her expression. "Sir, I'm going to need you to step away from the excavation site." "It's just a pool removal," Marcus protested, but even as he said it, he could hear how weak it sounded. "Step away, please." Marcus backed up, his hands raised, watching as the officer approached the hole. Her partner, a younger man with a serious expression, began walking the perimeter of the yard, his hand resting on his radio. The female officer knelt by the excavation, and Marcus saw her entire body go rigid. She looked up at her partner and nodded once, sharply. "I need backup," the partner said into his radio. "And get me the detective unit. We've got a situation here." Marcus felt the ground shift beneath his feet, and it had nothing to do with the demolition. Whatever was buried under his pool, it wasn't just debris or old landscaping materials. He looked at Karen, who was backing toward her own house, her face a mask of terror and guilt. "Karen," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "what did you do?" But she was already running, her perfectly manicured facade cracking as completely as the concrete he'd been destroying all morning. And as more police cars began arriving, as yellow tape started going up around his backyard, Marcus realized that his simple pool removal had just uncovered something that would change everything he thought he knew about his quiet suburban neighborhood, and the woman who'd been living right next door. Detective Sarah Chen had seen a lot of things in her 15 years with the department, but she'd never had a case that started with an above-ground pool removal in suburbia. Yet here she was, standing in Marcus Rivera's backyard at 11:30 a.m. on a Saturday, watching the crime scene techs carefully excavate what was clearly a shallow grave. "Talk to me," she said to Officer Martinez, who'd been first on scene. Homeowner was removing his pool, breaking up the concrete pad underneath. Jackhammer caught something that wasn't concrete. Neighbor called it in as a noise complaint, but Martinez gestured toward the Whitmore house, where Karen could be seen pacing frantically behind her kitchen window. Her reaction suggests she knew what was down there. Chen studied the excavation site. The techs had uncovered enough to confirm. Human remains. A partial skeleton wrapped in what appeared to be a plastic top and several garbage bags. Old burial, at least 5 years based on decomposition, but they'd need the coroner to be sure. Where's the homeowner now? Living room. With Officer Rodriguez. He's cooperative but shaken up. Claims he had no idea. Chen nodded, then looked back at the hole. Something bothered her about the positioning. When did he pour this concrete pad? Martinez checked his notes. Says it was 8 years ago, when he installed the pool. So whatever's down there was buried before he poured the concrete. He would have seen it during excavation. Unless he wasn't the one who buried it. Chen's radio crackled. Detective Chen, we've got the neighbor requesting to speak with you. Says she has information about the case. I'll bet she does, Chen muttered. Tell her I'll be right there. Marcus sat in his living room, his hands wrapped around a cup of coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. Through his front window, he could see the growing circus in his backyard, crime scene tape, forensics vans, uniformed officers keeping curious neighbors at bay. Mr. Rivera, Officer Rodriguez said. Gently, I know this is overwhelming, but I need to ask you some questions about the concrete pad. I've told you everything I know, Marcus replied, his voice hoarse. I poured it myself in 2017. The ground was clear, just dirt and grass. I would have noticed if there was anything buried there. You're certain about the timeline? Absolutely. I have photos from the construction. Receipts for the concrete. The whole project is documented because the HOA required permits. Rodriguez made notes. What about before you moved in? Do you know anything about the previous owner? Marcus shook his head. House was vacant when I bought it. Had been on the market for almost a year. The realtor said the previous owner had moved out of state for work. Do you remember the name? Henderson, I think. Or maybe Hendricks. Marcus rubbed his temples. It was 12 years ago. I can probably find the paperwork. That would be helpful. Rodriguez paused. What about your neighbor, Mrs. Whitmore? How long has she lived next door? She was here when I moved in. Always said she'd been in the neighborhood longer than anyone else. Marcus looked toward the kitchen window that faced Karen's house. Why? You think she knows something? Before Rodriguez could answer, Detective Chen knocked on the front door. Mr. Rivera? I'm Detective Chen. I know this has been a difficult morning, but I need to ask you about your relationship with Mrs. Whitmore. Marcus almost laughed, but there was nothing funny about the situation. Relationship? Karen's complained about something. I've done at least once a week for the past 12 years. She's called the HOA on me more times than I can count. What kinds of complaints? Everything. Grass too long, garbage cans out too early, pool too close to the property line. She actually tried to get the HOA to force me to move the pool. Last year, said it was an eyesore. Chen's eyebrows rose. She wanted you to move the pool. Move it or remove it entirely. Said it was bringing down property values. Marcus set down his coffee cup. Detective, what exactly did you find out there? Human remains. We are still working to identify them, but it appears they've been buried. For several years. The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. He'd been expecting something bad based on the police response, but hearing it confirmed made his stomach lurch. Someone was murdered in my backyard. We don't know the cause of death yet, but Mr. Rivera, the burial appears to predate your concrete pad, which means either you knew about it when you poured the concrete, or someone else buried them after I moved in but before I installed the pool. Marcus's mind raced. But that's impossible. I would have seen. He stopped mid-sentence, a memory surfacing. Wait. There was a period when I wasn't here. What do you mean? 2016. My ex-wife and I separated. I moved out for about 6 months. While we work things out. The house was empty except for when I'd come by to check on things or do maintenance. Chen leaned forward. Who had access to the property during that time? Just me. And Marcus felt the blood drain from his face. Karen had a key. For emergencies. To water plants, collect mail, that sort of thing. Across the yard, Detective Chen found Karen Whitmore in her kitchen, no longer the aggressive neighbor who'd been screaming about noise ordinances. The woman sitting at the granite breakfast bar looked 10 years older than she had 2 hours ago, her perfect blonde hair disheveled, her hands shaking as she clutched a tissue. "Mrs. Whitmore, I understand you wanted to speak with me." Karen looked up with red-rimmed eyes. "I know what you found." "Do you?" "It's Tom Henderson." Karen's voice was barely a whisper. The man who used to live in Marcus's house. Chen sat down across from her, keeping her expression neutral. "Tell me about Tom Henderson." Karen was quiet for so long that Chen wondered if she'd changed her mind about talking. Then, in a rush, the words came tumbling out. He was supposed to move to Portland. New job, fresh start. That's what he told everyone. But he never left town. Karen's hands twisted the tissue into shreds. He was blackmailing me." "Blackmailing you about what?" "My first husband, Richard. He died in 2014. Car accident. They said. Single vehicle collision, lost control on a wet road." Karen's laugh was bitter. Except it wasn't an accident. Chen felt the familiar chill that came with a case breaking wide open. "What really happened, Karen?" "Richard was having an affair. Had been for months. I found out, confronted him. We fought. He said he was leaving me, taking half of everything, maybe more if he could prove I'd been hiding assets." Karen's voice grew stronger, more defiant. "So I fixed his brake lines. Just enough to cause a failure at the right moment. And Tom Henderson knew about this. He was Richard's mechanic. When the insurance investigator started asking questions, Tom put 2 and 2 together. He came to me a year later, said he had proof. Photos of the brake line, documentation of the work Richard had done just days before the accident." Chen made notes, her mind already working through the timeline. "So Henderson was blackmailing you for how long?" 2 years. I paid him. $50,000 total, cleaned out Richard's life insurance payout. But it was never enough. He kept asking for more, threatening to go to the police. "What happened in 2016? Karen's composure finally cracked completely. Tears streamed down her face as she spoke. "He came to me in September, said he needed one final payment, $100,000. Said he really was moving to Portland this time, but he needed money to disappear completely. Give him the cash, and he'd turn over all the evidence and I'd never see him again." "But you didn't have the money." "I'd already given him everything I could liquidate without raising suspicions. The house was mortgaged to the hilt, and if I suddenly withdrew that much cash, people would ask questions." Karen wiped her eyes with the shredded tissue. "I told him I needed time to get the money together. He said he'd give me 2 weeks. And then he showed up drunk on a Tuesday night, banging on my door, screaming that I was trying to cheat him. Said he was done waiting, that he was going to the police the next morning unless I had his money." Chen could see where this was headed, but she let Karen tell it in her own words. "I invited him in, told him I had some of the money, that way could work something out. I made him coffee, tried to calm him down. But he was so angry, so drunk. He kept saying he was going to destroy me." "So you killed him?" Karen nodded miserably. "I put sleeping pills in his coffee. A lot of them. I'd been saving them up for weeks, just in case. He passed out on my couch, and I suffocated him. With a pillow. And then you buried him in Marcus's backyard." The house was empty. I knew Marcus wasn't coming back for a few days. He told me he was visiting his parents. I waited until the middle of the night, wrapped Tom in plastic sheeting and garbage bags, and buried him in the back corner of the yard where Marcus said he was thinking about putting a pool someday. Chen looked up from her notes. "You buried him exactly where you knew Marcus would eventually pour concrete." Karen's silence was answer enough. "You manipulated him into building the pool in that exact spot. That's why you've been so adamant about him not removing it. You knew that if he ever excavated that area." "I never meant for any of this to happen," Karen whispered. "I just wanted Tom to leave me alone. And then when Marcus started talking about putting in a pool, it seemed like the perfect way to make sure no one would ever find the body. Except Marcus did remove the pool. I tried to stop him. I filed complaints with the HOA, tried to 3 days after Karen's arrest, Marcus thought the worst was behind him. The crime scene tape was gone, the media vans had moved on to fresher stories, and the forensics team had finished processing his backyard. All that remained was a gaping hole where his pool used to be and the knowledge that he'd been living next to a murderer for over a decade. He was sitting on his back porch Tuesday evening, staring at the excavation site and wondering how he'd ever feel comfortable in his own yard again, when Detective Chen's unmarked sedan pulled into his driveway. "Mr. Rivera," she said as she approached, her expression grim. "We need to talk." Marcus felt his stomach drop. "I thought this was over." Karen confessed. She did. But confessions sometimes open more doors than they close. Chen sat down on the porch step beside him. "We've been digging into Tom Henderson's disappearance, trying to verify Karen's story. And we found some problems." "What kind of problems?" "The timeline doesn't work. Karen said she killed Henderson in September 2016, during the 6 months. You were separated from your wife. But Henderson's bank records show he was making ATM withdrawals through November of that year." Marcus frowned. Maybe she got the date wrong? It was traumatic. Maybe there's more. Chen pulled out a small notebook. Henderson had a storage unit across town. "We got a warrant to search it yesterday. Found boxes of documents, photos, financial records. The man was thorough. Blackmail material. Some of it. We found evidence supporting Karen's claim about her husband's murder, photos of the brake line damage, insurance paperwork, even a recording of her admitting to the crime." Chen paused. "But we also found evidence of other schemes. Henderson wasn't just blackmailing Karen, Mr. Rivera. He was running several operations simultaneously." Marcus felt a chill despite the warm evening air. "What does that have to do with me?" "One of his files has your name on it." The words hung in the air like a physical weight. Marcus stared at Chen, trying to process what she'd just said. "That's impossible. I barely knew the man. He moved out before I really got settled in the neighborhood." "Are you sure about that?" Chen opened her notebook. Henderson had detailed surveillance notes on you dating back to 2015. Photos of your house, your car, your daily routines. Bank statements showing deposits that don't match any legitimate source of income. Marcus's mouth went dry. "I don't understand." Neither did we, until we found this. Chen pulled out a plastic evidence bag containing a photograph. It showed Marcus coming out of a downtown office building, clearly taken with a telephoto lens. "This was taken in March 2016, Mr. Rivera. 3 months before your separation." Marcus recognized the building immediately. It housed the accounting firm where his ex-wife Sarah had worked. "I was picking up Sarah for lunch. We were trying to work through our marriage problems." The timestamp on this photo is 3:47 p.m. on a Wednesday. According to Henderson's notes, Sarah was supposed to be in a client meeting at that time. But the photo shows her leaving the building with you. "I don't see what." Marcus stopped, understanding dawning on him. He thought Sarah was embezzling money. Henderson had been tracking discrepancies in her client accounts for months. Small amounts, moved around in ways that suggested someone with inside knowledge was skimming funds. He was building a case to blackmail her. Marcus felt sick. "But Sarah never stole anything. She's the most honest person I know." "We believe you. We've had forensic accountants going through Henderson's evidence for the past 3 days. His suspicions were based on coincidences and misinterpreted data. Your ex-wife was never stealing money." "Then why are you telling me this?" Chen's expression grew even more serious. "Because Henderson's notes indicate he was planning to approach you about it. He thought you might be in on the scheme, or that you could be convinced to help him pressure Sarah into paying him off." Marcus rubbed his temples, trying to make sense of it all. "But he never approached me. I would remember." "That's because someone killed him before he got the chance." The implication hit Marcus like a freight train. "You think I killed Henderson to protect Sarah?" "It's a theory we have to explore. You had motive, protecting your wife from false accusations. You had opportunity, access to your own backyard during the separation. And you certainly had the knowledge to bury a body where you knew you'd eventually pour concrete." Marcus shot to his feet, pacing across the porch. This is insane. I didn't even know Henderson was investigating Sarah. I didn't know he existed until after he was supposedly already gone. But your wife knew him, didn't she? The question stopped Marcus cold. What? Henderson's notes mentioned several interactions with Sarah Rivera at her workplace. He'd been posing as a potential client, trying to get information about her procedures, her access to accounts. She would have recognized him. Marcus sank back down onto the porch step, his mind racing. Sarah had never mentioned anyone suspicious at work, but then again, they'd been having so many problems in their marriage that they barely talked about their daily lives. Detective, I need to call Sarah. I need to. We already spoke with her, Mr. Rivera, yesterday afternoon. Something in Chen's tone made Marcus's blood run cold. And she remembers Henderson. Says he came to the office several times in early 2016, asking about investment opportunities. She thought he was legitimate until he started asking strange questions about her access to client funds. That doesn't prove anything. No, but this might. Chen pulled out another evidence bag, this one containing a small slip of paper. We found this in Henderson's storage unit. It's a note in your ex-wife's handwriting. Marcus took the bag with trembling hands. Through the plastic, he could see Sarah's distinctive script. Tom, we need to meet. This has gone too far. I won't let you destroy my family. Sarah. She was planning to confront him, Chen continued. The note is dated September 15, 2016. Henderson's last confirmed sighting was September 18th. Marcus stared at the note, his world tilting off its axis. You think Sarah killed him? We think someone did. And right now, we have two suspects who both had motive and opportunity. Chen stood up. Mr. Rivera, I need to ask you directly. Did you know about Henderson's investigation of your wife? No. Did your wife ever mention anyone bothering her? At work, asking inappropriate questions? Marcus tried to remember. Those months had been such a blur of arguments and counseling sessions and desperate attempts to save their marriage. Maybe. She said something about a creepy client once, but I didn't think much of it. When was this? I don't know. Summer 2016? We were barely communicating by then. Chen made notes. Mr. Rivera, we are going to need you to come to the station tomorrow for a formal interview. And we'll need you to provide DNA samples, fingerprints, anything that might help us rule you out as a suspect. Am I under arrest? Not yet, but I'd recommend getting a lawyer. After Chen left, Marcus sat alone on his porch as darkness fell around him. 3 days ago, his biggest problem had been removing an old pool. Now he was a suspect in a murder case, and his ex-wife might be involved. He pulled out his phone and dialed Sarah's number. She answered on the first ring. Marcus, I was wondering when you'd call. Sarah, we need to talk. The police, I know. They came to see me yesterday. Sarah's voice was calm, too calm. They showed me that note. Did you write it? There was a long pause. Yes. Marcus felt his heart sink. Sarah, please tell me you didn't. I didn't kill him, Marcus. But I know who did. What? Henderson wasn't working alone. He had a partner, someone feeding him information about the neighborhood, about the people who lived here. Someone who knew which residents might be vulnerable to blackmail schemes. Marcus gripped the phone tighter. Who? Think about it, Marcus. Who would know everyone's business? Who would have access to personal information, financial records, family problems? Who could watch the neighborhood without raising suspicion? The answer hit him like a physical blow. Karen. Karen was Henderson's partner. She wasn't his victim, she was his accomplice. Until she decided she wanted out of the business and Henderson became a liability instead of an asset. Marcus's mind reeled. But she confessed. She told the police everything. She told them a story that made her look like a victim who snapped under pressure. But think about it. Doesn't it seem convenient that Henderson just happened to target the one person in the neighborhood who'd already committed murder? Marcus tried to process what Sarah was telling him. You're saying Karen killed her husband as part of their blackmail scheme. I'm saying Karen and Henderson were partners from the beginning. They identified wealthy targets, gathered compromising information. Then Henderson would do the actual blackmail while Karen played the innocent neighbor. When her husband started asking questions about her sudden financial problems, she killed him and made it look like an accident. But why would she kill Henderson? Because he got greedy. And because she realized she could frame someone else for his murder while simultaneously burying the evidence forever. Sarah's voice grew cold. Think about it, Marcus. She manipulated you into building that pool exactly where she buried the body. She spent years complaining about it, knowing that would make you more determined to eventually remove it. She was setting you up to be the fall guy. Marcus felt the world spinning around him. But Marcus hung up the phone and immediately regretted not asking Sarah to come over. The house felt too quiet, too exposed, and every shadow seemed to hide potential threats. He was reaching for his phone to call her back when he heard the familiar creak of the gate between his and Karen's properties, the gate that was supposed to remain locked. He moved to the kitchen window, staying in the shadows, and peered through the blinds. Karen stood in his backyard, silhouetted against the security light that illuminated the excavation site. She was out of bail, probably, or maybe they'd released her pending trial since she'd confessed and wasn't considered a flight risk. But she wasn't supposed to be here. Her bail conditions certainly included staying away from the crime scene. And from Marcus. As he watched, Karen walked slowly around the perimeter of the hole where Henderson's body had been found. She was carrying something, a small bag or package, and her movements were deliberate, purposeful. This wasn't the behavior of someone having an emotional breakdown at the scene of their crime. This was someone cleaning up loose ends. Marcus backed away from the window, his heart hammering. He needed to call 911, needed to get the police here before Karen realized he was watching her. But as he reached for his phone, the kitchen lights suddenly went out. Then the living room lights. Then everything. She'd cut his power. Marcus stood, frozen in the darkness, listening to the silence of his house without the hum of appliances and air conditioning. Outside, Karen's footsteps crunched across the gravel path that led to his back door. He had maybe 30 seconds before she made it to the house. Moving as quietly as possible, Marcus crept toward the front door, planning to slip out and run to a neighbor's house. But as he reached for the deadbolt, he heard the distinctive sound of his own key turning in the front lock. She still had the emergency key he'd given her years ago. Marcus backed away from the door, his mind racing. The key would only open the deadbolt. The door chain was still engaged. But Karen would know that, and she'd know he was home since his car was in the driveway. He heard her try the door, then the soft rattle of the chain. A moment later, the back door handle turned. She had keys to both doors. Marcus moved quickly down the hallway toward his bedroom, where he kept a baseball bat in the closet. But he'd only made it halfway when he heard Karen's voice, eerily calm and conversational. "Hello, Marcus. I know you're in here." He froze, pressed against the hallway wall. "We need to talk, neighbor, about Sarah and about the lies she's been telling the police." Marcus eased his way toward the bedroom, staying close to the wall. Karen's footsteps moved through the kitchen, then into the living room. "I know she called you tonight. I've been watching her house, watching her make her little plans." Karen's voice was getting closer. "Did she tell you about the storage unit? About Henderson's insurance policy?" Marcus reached his bedroom door and slipped inside, moving toward the closet where he kept the bat. But as his hand closed around the handle, Karen appeared in the doorway. She was holding a gun. "I really wish you hadn't gotten involved in this, Marcus. You were supposed to find the body, call the police, and let the investigation play out. Nice and simple." Marcus raised his hand slowly. "Karen, you don't want to do this. The police already know about your partnership with Henderson." Karen laughed, a cold sound that raised the hair on Marcus's arms. "No, they don't. They know what I told them, that Tom was blackmailing me about Richard's death. A crime of passion committed by a desperate woman. Very sympathetic. But Sarah has evidence. Sarah has some old photos and recordings that don't prove anything except that Tom was documenting his blackmail activities, which fits perfectly with my story." Karen stepped into the room, keeping the gun trained on Marcus. "What Sarah doesn't understand is that I planned for this contingency years ago." "What are you talking about?" Tom was sloppy, Marcus. He kept records of everything, thought it made him smart, but it also made him predictable. Karen's smile was chilling. I've been slowly removing evidence from his storage unit for months, replacing real proof with doctored versions that support the story I wanted to tell. Marcus felt his hope crumbling. The police searched the storage unit. They found exactly what I wanted them to find. Evidence that Tom was a blackmailer who got killed by one of his victims. Evidence that points to either you or Sarah as his murderer. Karen gestured with the gun toward the bed. Sit down. Marcus perched on the edge of the mattress, his mind desperately searching for options. Why Sarah? Why not just frame me? Because Sarah made herself a target when she contacted me about Tom's threats. She thought she was being smart, trying to turn us against each other. But she gave me the perfect opportunity to redirect suspicion away from myself. You're going to kill us both. I'm going to kill you, Karen corrected. Sarah will be found tomorrow, apparently having committed suicide out of guilt for murdering Tom Henderson. Very tragic. And tonight, you'll be killed in a home invasion, probably by someone looking for the evidence Sarah claimed to have. Marcus realized with growing horror how thoroughly Karen had planned this. That's why you cut the power, to make it look like a break-in. Among other things, I also needed to disable your security system. Karen pulled a small device from her pocket. Amazing what you can buy online these days. Cell phone jammers, electronic lockpicks, voice changers. Voice changers. How do you think Tom Henderson was able to make those bank withdrawals after I killed him? Amazing how similar male voices can sound over a phone when you have the right equipment and account numbers. The implications hit Marcus like a sledgehammer. You've been impersonating Henderson for months, making it look like he was still alive. Long enough to muddy the timeline and give myself the perfect alibi. By the time anyone figures out the real date of death, you and Sarah will be dead, and I'll be the poor neighbor who tried to warn the police about suspicious activity. Marcus heard a sound from somewhere else in the house, a soft scraping, like a window being opened. Karen heard it too and tensed. Expecting someone? She asked quietly. No, Marcus said, but his heart leaped. Maybe Sarah had come over after all. Karen moved toward the bedroom door, keeping the gun pointed at Marcus. If that's your ex-wife, this actually works out better. I can handle both problems at once. But as she reached the doorway, a familiar voice called out from the living room. Police. Mrs. Whitmore, we have a warrant for your arrest. Karen's face went white. Impossible. They released me. You're in violation of your bail conditions. Detective Chen's voice carried clearly through the house. You're not supposed to be within 500 feet of this property. Karen's composure finally cracked. She spun back toward Marcus, raising the gun. You called them. I didn't have time. They're not taking me back to jail, Karen snarled. Not for crimes I committed to protect myself from men who thought they could control me. The sound of footsteps approached down the hallway. Karen backed against the bedroom wall, the gun wavering between Marcus and the doorway. Mrs. Whitmore, Chen called out. Come out with your hands visible. We know you're armed, and we know Mr. Rivera is in there with you. How could they know I'm here? Karen whispered, more to herself than to Marcus. The answer came from Detective Chen. Sarah Rivera is cooperating with our investigation. She told us about the evidence Henderson left with her, and about your phone call tonight. Marcus felt a surge of relief. Sarah had been smart enough to go to the police instead of trying to handle this alone. She also told us about the electronic surveillance you've been conducting on this neighborhood, Chen continued. The cameras, the listening devices, the phone taps. We found your command center in your basement, Karen. We know about all of it. Karen's face cycled through expressions of rage, fear, and calculation. They can't prove anything. It's all circumstantial. Actually, we can. Chen's voice was getting closer. We found Henderson's real storage unit, Karen. The one you didn't know about. The one where he kept insurance against his partner. Karen went perfectly still. Video of you killing your husband. Audio recordings of you planning Henderson's murder. Financial records showing how you've been laundering money through fake blackmail schemes for years. Chen paused at the bedroom doorway, just out of sight. Tom Henderson was smarter than you gave him credit for. That's impossible, Karen breathed. He never trusted you completely. Smart man. Too bad he wasn't smart enough to stay away from you entirely. Karen looked at Marcus, then at the doorway where Chen's voice was coming from. For a moment, Marcus thought she might surrender. Instead, she smiled. You know what the real irony is, Marcus. She said conversationally, I actually liked you. You were a good neighbor, quiet, minded your own business. If you just left that pool alone, none of this would have happened. She turned the gun toward the doorway, toward where Chen's voice had been coming from. But some people just can't leave well enough alone. The gunshot was deafeningly loud in the small bedroom, but it wasn't Karen who fired. Detective Chen stood in the doorway, her service weapon smoking, as Karen Whitmore crumpled to the floor, the gun falling from her lifeless fingers. Are you hurt, Mr. Rivera? Marcus shook his head, unable to speak. He stared at Karen's bod.